Well, I realized that I liked as you say, I liked using real people, real events, real parts of history, and learning about that as I went along. So the research is fun for me. But actually, what started it was, I had no intention of writing about it, but I found an old picture in my parents' attic, this long sepia tinted panorama of about 100 people standing in front of a mountain range in 1915, and it said National Retail Monument Dealers at Marble, Colorado. And I took it to my dad. This was many years ago. And I said, why do we even have this? We lived on the East Coast, or we lived on the West Coast, but Colorado, what is this? He said, I think one of those guys is probably my great-grandfather, meaning my great-grandfather. And I think he had something to do with quarrying the marble for the Lincoln Memorial. And I said, really? What about that? And he said, I don't really know very much. His own dad had died. We'd moved around. They weren't, that side of the family really weren't storytellers. So I just thought the picture was cool. I hung it in my office. And then as my dad got older, probably 10 years ago, I said, I'm going to find out some more about that. And he said, okay. And I began to research the history of this marble quarrying town and the labor movement and the Redstone, Colorado. And from there, I found these amazing stories and characters and vivid details, and invented a town loosely based on some of that history. And that's how Gilded Mountain came to be. And I started with a picture of women and children with snow up, to their ears. How do you walk in a skirt in that? How do you bathe? How do you do the laundry? How do you nurse a child? And so I imagined this young girl living in a quarry town, having to go to school and looking for a different life. But I chose to have her be the child of French Canadian immigrants because a lot of quarry workers, stone workers, a lot of Quebecois came down into Vermont and Maine and worked in quarries there. And so I thought that maybe because of a labor incident, her father might have moved the family up to Colorado to work in a quarry there. And so I actually started writing it in the third person, but found that was too distancing, and I needed to have that first person voice. So I switched it. And at first, she's observing and reporting all of the things that are going on around her. And some of these incidents are very troubling. And she's, it's kind of the education of Sylvie Pelletier, her learning as she goes along, how she's interpreting the world, because she's young and naive. But the naivete was difficult. And I think that I got around it by having her be very polite and cordial and well-behaved on the surface, but that her thoughts were subversive and angry in some ways because of how she's taught to squelch herself down. In the previous novel, the narrator was very fierce and obstreperous and outspoken. And in some ways, writing that, I noticed in myself, particularly talking about subjects that I was raised not to talk about, i.e. women's business, birth control, childbirth, etc. I noticed that I had to really learn to use my voice and speak up, because I was taught not to talk about these certain things. So I was interested in exploring silence and naivete, and how a character might use to learn to speak up, and the consequences of doing so. She sees as she goes along that you can get smacked down for speaking up. I just kept finding that everything that was happening in this little town, and a lot of it is based on the actual history of Marble, Colorado, or Redstone, Colorado. So I would find, say, this opulent manor house owned by a coal baron and his wife, who was rumored to be European royalty. And I thought, okay, an opulent manor house, that's good. And it could be kind of like Downton Abbey set in the Rockies. And then I found a radical female newspaper editor who criticized the company. And I thought, oh, wow, I've never heard of her, but she sure was brave to do what she did. And I'll need a character like that. And so in some ways, history is full of stories like low-hanging fruit that you can just embellish and borrow and enrich with your own imagination, and give the past some texture and some specificity. And that's the way the town took shape in my mind. It wasn't called Gilded Mountain. Arriving at this title was very difficult. For a working title, it was called Beautiful Radiant Things. And that comes from a quote of Emma Goldman's, in which she said, "I want freedom and the right to self-expression and everybody's right to beautiful, radiant things." But it was not a title that really told you much about what was going on in the story. But in the book, there was a fictitious mountain range called the Gilded Mountains. There's a fictional town called Moonstone. And so from there, there was the Diamond River. So we started to play with those words, and there was Gilded Mountain. Well, I think I have found a good niche, which is to write about history. I think that for me, discovering women and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, kind of history that we don't get in our textbooks, is really interesting. And I find it's important. It strikes a chord with a lot of people. I wish I had known about Mother Jones or Madame Restel or certain other women in our past that we don't understand what our foremothers went through and how they managed. We read about the war, we read about the king, we read about the beautiful clothes of the queen, but we don't understand what ordinary people accomplished. And it's really fascinating to me. So the next book that I'm working on is another novel set in the past. And I discovered a woman who had great impact on the way our country handles mental illness. And so we'll see if she stays alive and can make it through the number of pages that she'll need to get through.